So this is an update, I think, of a presentation that I gave earlier in the year at the EURIG meeting. So some of this will look familiar. British Library, still the National Library of the United Kingdom, and we still have two main sites at London in St Pancras and at Boston Spa in West Yorkshire. There are cataloguers based at both of those sites, but also still at home. So we implemented RDA in 2013 at exactly the same time as the regulations governing legal deposit were being extended to cover non-print publications, which resulted in something close to a doubling of our intake of books, both electronic and physical. So because we obviously like a challenge, we're going to do our implementation of the RDA official toolkit in conjunction with a major site redevelopment at Boston Spa. So this site will be redeveloped over the next 4 to 5 years. You can see in the image on the screen that there's a kind of subliminal building on the left. That's the new high density storage building, which will increase storage capacity. Unfortunately, the site where it's going to be built is the site of an existing storage building, and we will also, which needs to be demolished. We will also need space for a huge spoil heap as part of the building process. And the place earmarked for that is currently occupied by cataloguers. So the building on the right of the right center of the screen is the Urquhart building, which is where the serials cataloging teams and the acquisitions teams and the metadata team are based. That building is also going to be not demolished, but substantially redeveloped and improved as a focal point for the whole site at Boston Spa, where the public will be admitted on the first floor, the first 2 floors, I think. And there'll still be some storage space, and there will be space towards the rear of the building for backroom staff. But that won't be the case until 2024. Until that point, we will be working in interim accommodation, and I'm currently involved in planning the moves of my staff to alternative accommodation on site. One consequence of this is that we're going to lose a lot of training rooms that we had on site. On the other hand, over the last year or so, we've all become used to working from home, and the library has in fact implemented hybrid work patterns for staff who will continue to work from home. To some extent, it depends on personal preference, how many days you're at home, how many days you're in the office, but you have to be in the office at least one day. During this interim period while the redevelopment is going on, not all staff can be accommodated on site, so priority is being given to staff who have to be on site to manage physical collections, for example. So cataloguing staff will continue in some cases to work substantially from home, and certainly my staff will largely be working from home during that period, which creates some challenges for delivering training, etc. And I'll come back to how we're going to try to address those challenges. But anyway, for the moment, we're under construction. So as I've just said, we're still using obviously the original RDA toolkit, which we implemented in 2013. We had anticipated that this would be the year when the official toolkit would actually be implemented, but that really proved to be unrealistic. And so we've made a commitment that we won't start to implement before July of next year. So at the moment, we're working on some induction and training materials for our documentation and training working group members. We've also got some meetings with stakeholders lined up. Our priority throughout the implementation project will be to transfer existing RDA users to the official toolkit. We obviously have additional work to do to revise all of our training materials on cataloguing to reflect the new toolkit. And we will also have the intention to extend the application of RDA within the library to include time-based media. So our sound recordings and video collections, for example. We're aiming for a light touch, and this has caused great hilarity amongst people that I've mentioned it to. But what it means is we want to minimise impact on cataloguers and our other stakeholders, which include the legal deposit libraries, our cataloguing and publication agent, and other suppliers. The light touch does not apply to cataloguing managers, trainers, or other cataloger or other colleagues who will be working on documentation and implementation of the official toolkit. They will be having a heavy hand, unfortunately. We're not anticipating any disruption to services arising. It's difficult to predict exactly what impact Boston Spa Renewed may have, but we don't expect any significant disruption over the period. We'll continue to catalogue Mark 21 for the foreseeable future. We have a programme to replace our existing library management systems underway, but we do not yet know what will replace our Aleph cataloguing system, and we do not yet know whether it will be a Mark system or something else, but we suspect it will be Mark. We'll review the impact of any Mark developments, which Thurston's obviously been talking about this morning, on productivity. We also expect to make data, and in fact we are in the process of implementing international standard name identifier in our records. This is publishers and aggregators to embed the ISNI in workflows, and with our copyright agent BDS to Asian records. So a consequence of this will obviously be some reduction in the amount of work that has to be done to identify and disambiguate persons. We're also looking at making use of RDA relationship identifiers within the MARC records, and identifying those with the registry identifier, because we expect that the actual publicly viewed identifiers will continue to be in effect the Mark 21 relationship code terms, which are more human readable, shall we say. The implementation project itself has a steering group which I'm chairing. We have had a long-standing standing policy working group, which I'll say a bit more about in a moment. The configuration working group will be getting actually set up, got the group working yet. We've got a documentation and training working group, which, as I said, is getting underway with some initial training and familiarization of the official toolkit. And there's a legal for the other UK and Irish legal deposit library, which we will, which has had some meetings earlier in the year. Those have been somewhat in abeyance while we've been developing our orientation documentation, but now that that's available, we'll be reinstituting those meetings. Going to have a cataloguing projects coordinator in post in early October. Documentation and training work particularly. Documentation. We're working with application profiles in Mark 21, and I'll show you a bit about that in a moment, which are being loaded into the toolkit. We Library of Congress developed a batch loading tool, which they shared with us, and we've made some changes to that tool to meet our own requirements, and I'll say a little bit about that in a moment too. And one of the things that we've noticed, of course, is as well as loading policies in bulk to the toolkit, which we couldn't get the policies into the toolkit manually. This batch loading tool is essential. We're noticing that we're having to go back and amend
Alan, we can't hear you anymore.
in some policies and correct some, in some cases because there are changes to RDA, some cases before, and in some cases because we've reconsidered what our policy should be. We're also going to be working. Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Is that okay for volume?
Now we can hear you. Yeah, it freezes times. Could you also hide the sharing banner, because it hides part of your presentation, please?
Sure.
Thanks.
Okay, so did you hear any of this slide on products?
Only the start.
Okay, I'll start again. Okay, so the products that we're going to produce as a consequence of our work are largely documentation. I'll say a little bit about the application profiles, excuse me, in a moment. And we're to load into the toolkit to appear in line with options and conditions. Excuse me. For that, we found that a batch loading tool is essential because the volume of work is beyond what we could achieve manually to load the policies into the toolkit. Congress created, and I'll show a bit more. I'll show it in a bit more detail in a moment. We're also having to make amendments to the policies that we've already loaded. Sometimes that's because the policies have changed, or the order in which the options are presented has changed. Sometimes it's because we've changed our minds about how we should approach a particular option or condition. and sometimes it's simply that there are new things in RDA. So we're also revising all of our guidelines and workflows to reflect the terminology used in our finalising how we think the workflow documents in particular should be redeveloped into something much more generic than training materials will obviously emanate from all of that activity remotely, just on practical grounds because of Boston Sparrow, which will enable us to deliver courses to internal and external audiences. We're also doing some collaboration with Library of Congress and the Programme for Cooperative Toolkit application. So here's something on policy statements. What we've done is we've created a sort of reconciliation table which puts those together with our policy statements. The policy slide are broken down into components. So we have prefix, beginning, middle, and end, and also we have the capacity to have the prefix, beginning, middle, and end are all effectively boilerplate that can be reused for multiple policy statements. And then when we do the batch loading, the policy statements appear hopefully in the right place in line with the option on the page. You can see that we have, easy this is to read, but we obviously record the element identifiers, but we also record the location on the page for the particular policy and also the order in which it occurs on the page. And all of that is used by the batch loading process to ensure that it gets into the right place. This is again, it's a shot of an application profile. They're not documents that are really designed to be demonstrated on PowerPoint. But as I said, we're basing this on Mark 21, and in fact, this is based on one of our input templates in Aleph, and we've expanded to some extent what we have in Aleph, of course, by adding information about the element, such as the domain range and the reference to the toolkit, which I'll say a bit more about in a second, and also recording methods and vocabulary encoding schemes that may be relevant. So we're linking to the toolkit, and for the purposes of the exercises we've been doing so far, we're going to what we think is the most specific and relevant point for any given Mark element or sub-element. That obviously is going to be tested through application by the group that are currently evaluating these tools. And we are obviously able to record different recording methods for the same element, or where necessary, if, for example, date of publication needs to be recorded in two different ways in Mark, as in, for example. The collaboration with Library of Congress and the PCC follows an approach from the Library of Congress to work together on documentation for the RDA official toolkit. This really got underway only just over a month or so ago. I've seen some examples of what's being done. Really at the moment, we're aggregating institutional guidelines using a standard template for specific elements or guidance documents. And the terminology is to some extent being standardized, and we're providing examples to support I think both Mark and BibFrame users is the intention. That brings me to the community resources area, which has been developed as a consequence of the internationalization strategy for RDA. It's obviously important that RDA should support different cataloguing traditions and support them equally. So some of the Anglo-American legacy practices that were embedded in the, are currently embedded in the toolkit are being relocated to those community resources pages. These pages will be and that's quite an important thing from the perspective of Library of Congress, ourselves and PCC, which is why we're starting to work together. So there are community resources are really divided into two categories. There are refinements, which Anglo-American cataloguing rules really around how to formulate an authorized access point, how to, there are vocabularies which, for example, include the books of the Bible according to the King James version of the Bible, which is used in the Anglo-American tradition, but obviously not in every other tradition. And we've been a training system which we call the Learning Hub. It supports learning for staff and for external audiences. It can support a wide range of content types. It can be adapted to, and
Alan?
I still cannot hear you.
I'm sorry for these difficulties. Alan Thurston, can you hear us?
I think they said they were gonna swap computers.
I chose that Thurston is muted.
Yes. I will try to